I mentioned that I'm a big fan of the sense of style, and you devote a whole chapter to the curse of knowledge, which I think is and you point the finger at academics and financial advisors and lawyers and the rest of it. For our listeners not familiar with the phenomenon, could you describe it, and could you maybe talk about the connection between the curse of knowledge and when people, maybe particularly some academics, use too much data?
Yes, right. So the curse of knowledge is a psychological phenomenon in which once you know something, it's extraordinarily difficult to imagine what it's like not to know it. That is, to project yourself into the minds of other people who don't know what you know, even to remember back to before you knew it. People think that if you know it now, you always knew it. And the classic demonstration comes from an experiment with children. In the case of cognitive development, the same phenomenon is sometimes called lack of a theory of mind or mentalizing. The theory here not referring to a scientific theory, but to kind of our own, everyone's folk theory. So the classic study is you take a 3-year-old, you play a little scenario. You take a marble that was in a basket and you put it in the box. And the child sees it, the child knows what the marble is. And you say, Sally, a puppet, sees the marble in the basket. Sally leaves the room. You put the marble from the basket into the box. Sally comes back into the room. Where will Sally look for the marble? And kids will say, in the box. Now, the child knows that the marble was put in the box, but Sally wasn't in the room when that happened. Sally has no way of knowing that the marble was in the box. The child just instinctivly assumes that what he himself knows, everyone else knows, and gives the wrong answer about Sally. And by 4 years of age, most kids solve the problem. They know that what they know and what Sally knows are different. Still, it still afflicts us as adults. And I think the main explanation for why academic writing is so dreadful is not the common conspiracy theory. Academics, they try to sound highfalutin. They're trying to bamboozle people because they have nothing to say with all this highfalutin jargon to make up for the fact that they're spouting banalities. I actually don't think that's the best explanation, because I know a lot of brilliant scholars who really do have something to say, but they just can't say it. And the reason they can't say it is they don't know that their entire autobiography, umpteen years of graduate school and postdoc and being a professor, and they've amassed all of this technical vocabulary, all of these paradigms and analytic techniques, each one of which they can identify with a label. And they think that everyone knows those labels. And it doesn't occur to them that their audience hasn't lived the lives that they have lived, and a lot of it is completely needless. So in neuroscience, there's absolutely no precision to be gained in talking about a murine model as opposed to a mouse, or for something like in plant biology, Arabidopsis. If you just say in parentheses a mustard plant, you've sacrificed a dozen keystrokes and that amount of screen space, and you've multiplied by several orders of magnitude the size of the audience that knows what you're talking about. So it's a bad trade-off to use abbreviations and or to fail to give examples when doing so multiplies or maybe even exponentiates your readership. And also, it's not just abbreviations, because those are the easiest things to weed out, but also abstractions. Describing something in language of what it means to you as opposed to the concrete goings on. So if I'm going to, lose my own field of cognitive development, or one of my fields, you say an age-appropriate engaging stimulus was used in condition 1. If you just said a Mickey Mouse doll, then people would be able to form an image and know what you're talking about. Age-appropriate, developmentally appropriate stimulus, what does that even mean? And there's a lot of scientific and academic talk which is couched in abstractions And the human mind is best when it can visualize something.
And it takes us, I'm right, aren't I, that it takes us, clearly it takes us longer to process and work out what that means in exactly the same way as, maybe this is a particular example, but if we use the passive voice rather than the active voice, it takes us longer to process what that is. The cat chased the mouse is easier and quicker to process than the mouse was chased by the cat?
In general, although I have a discussion of that, and that's a kind of advice that is age-old, it isn't exactly right. There are actually a lot of cases in which the passive is better because, and kind of appreciating how language works, the logic of language can help you differentiate between when the passive actually might be the better choice. So here's the thing about language, and it is a question of information, data if you want. Language has to do two things at once. Or at least, the order of words in a sentence, at least for languages like English, which rely a lot on word order. So you've got word, 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 word. How do you know who did what to whom? Well, in general, the word before the verb tends to be the doer, and the word after the verb tends to be the done to. So we use the left to right position or early to late position in a sentence as a way of coding information about who did what to whom. That's fine as far as it goes, except for the fact that we're serial information processors. So words that come in earlier in the sentence are psychologically different than words that come in later in the sentence. That is, the first words orient you. It's how you sort of set the scene, where you know what's being talked about. The later words kind of comment, they add information to the context that you've set up, the scene that you've set. Well, that means that there's contradictory demands on word order. Word order is being asked to do two things at once. On the one hand, to code information. On the other hand, to engage the listener or reader's attention. The reason that we have the passive voice, the reason it's been in the English language for more than 1,000 years, is it's a way of decoupling them. If you can say the mouse was chased by the cat, you're expressing the same content, who did what to whom, but you're getting the mouse out earlier in the sentence. And if the entire preceding context was about the mouse, if, so to speak, to use a visual analogy, the camera has been trained on the mouse in all of the sentences so far, the metaphorical camera, and now a cat appears out of the blue and chomps the mouse, it's actually easier to understand the sentence if you say the mouse was bitten by the cat, because the mouse is how you come to the scene in the first place based on a prior context. So in that case, if you've been following the travails of the mouse for sentence after sentence after sentence, if you then say the cat ate the mouse, it's like, well, wait a second, what cat? If you say, well, the mouse was eaten by the cat, then you have that continuity and coherence. So as a modification of your advice, it's not that the active is always better than the passive. The passive is better when the attention has been focused on the done to, the patient, to use the technical term. But if you'll pardon an example of itself, the passive tends to be overused in academic and and that is a genuine problem that it is overused, because the problem there is that the writer, again, it's a kind of curse of knowledge problem. The writer kind of knows what's happened. They start with the outcome because they know the outcome, and then they kind of work backwards and tell you how it got there. Whereas the poor reader doesn't know how it ends up. They want to be led through a narrative, cause before effect. The tendency to have effect then cause is an example of the curse of knowledge for someone who already knows how the story ended up, and that's why one of the reasons academics overuse it.
That is, you may have seen the appearance of my own cat Quincy's tail during the previous answer.
I did.
He was chasing, I have to say, no mice.